Okay, I think we're going to get started. Good morning. Welcome to the Internationalizing the Curriculum Campus and Curriculum Conference. And our session today is Teaching Global Leadership in a Domestic Context, Lessons Learned from a May Session Immersion Course. And our presenters are Katie Peacock from CLA and Mary Benasuti from Humphrey. And I will hand it over to them.
Good, my mic is working. Well, good morning, everyone. I might try to encourage you to come down a little closer just because we have space to do so, but I know that's not always a successful question to ask, but we do have a very small thing that I was hoping to hand out, but I considered this example before we learned that we were going to be in this auditorium, so I was expecting a much smaller space, so we'll just work with that. My name is Katie Peacock. I work on campus in an office called the Community Service Learning Center, and my co-presenter, Mary.
I'm Mary Benasuti, and I'm the Associate Director of the Center for Integrative Leadership, which is an endeavor of both the Carlson School and the Humphrey School.
So we're here to talk about did anyone attend the presentation last year at this conference with the May session conversation about global leadership program? Okay, a couple of you. So this is last year we presented a little bit about this course before it had actually happened. And so this time we actually have 1 year under our belt, some evaluation and some experiences that we want to share with you and lessons learned. So that's really the focus, is to talk about how this course got started, the partnerships that exist to make it happen, and then exactly what happened in the class. Before we get started into sort of the meat of it, one thing that I think is worth explaining is that why Mary and I are part of this global leadership program. Neither of our offices are in the GPSA, but I was invited onto the Global Leadership Initiative, which I'll talk about in a little bit, because one, part of my role at the university is doing service learning coordination. So I work with a lot of off-campus community partners to connect academic courses with opportunities in the Twin Cities. And so Cedar Riverside was one of the neighborhoods that I had some work with. I was also a graduate student at the Humphrey Institute and a founding member of CHANCE, the Cedar Humphrey Action for Neighborhood Collaborative Engagement, which was a really intentional student-run movement to better connect the Humphrey Institute with the community, because being a school of politics and public affairs, there was actually a strong disconnect between the public community and the work that we were doing in the classroom. So that was sort of why I was brought on to bring leadership to developing this course.
And then I was asked to teach the course because when Katie and this handful of students created CHANCE, almost about 5 years ago now, I was hired to be the staff support for that student-led initiative. So a big part of my work here at the university is coordinating this campus community partnership with the Cedar Riverside neighborhood.
And of course, it's totally appropriate that we're talking about Cedar Riverside, because as we sit in this auditorium, we are actually in the neighborhood. So I can't think of a better place to talk about the work that we've been doing than on the West Bank, which is part of the neighborhood. So just to give a little bit of background, who is familiar with the Global Leadership Program or the initiative that started, or maybe who served on a committee? Just one person. Okay. So for those of you who aren't familiar, about 4 years ago, Meredith McQuaid and Rusty Barcelo, who was the vice president for Office of Equity and Diversity, had basically come together and said, we need to start thinking a little bit more about the connections between domestic diversity and global diversity, and how we think about developing students as leaders to work in this very intercultural and diverse context. And so from that sort of initial partnership, there developed 4 major departments that decided to sponsor this Global Leadership Program. And you'll see it's the Office of Equity and Diversity, Global Programs and Strategy Alliance, the Office for Public Engagement, and the Office of Student Affairs. And really, since then, it's grown into a number of other units and departments that are supporting this work. So it's actually quite a large endeavor with a lot of different departments, which of course has its challenges and opportunities, because the more partners you get, I think the better quality of an experience and outcomes, but it also can be very slow moving, which is, again, we started this 4 years ago, and this course just happened for the first time last year. So it was kind of a slow moving process for just a 3-credit course. So from the Global Leadership Executive Committee, basically they developed a mission statement, which is the framework or the anchor for which we used in developing this course and a lot of the other programming that's come out of the Global Leadership Program. And as you can see, the mission is to create global citizens who through authentic engagement in diverse local and international communities will be prepared to lead in a culturally complex world. So again, that's sort of the overall anchor or framework for how we're thinking about this. How it's actually been implemented programmatically is kind of 2 main ways, and this sort of shows you that, is that we've looked at both the curricular and the co-curricular side. So examples of the curricular include, if people are familiar with the leadership minor, which is housed here, it's co-housed in public affairs and organizational leadership and policy, they just changed, OLPD.
OLPD, yeah.
I can't remember. Is the policy development? Yeah, okay. So that minor, which already existed, started looking at ways to further integrate global leadership as opposed to just leadership. So how are we thinking about our own identities, not only in sort of a domestic context, but in an international context? So they've done a lot of work of integrating those concepts and theories into their existing curriculum. The May session is another example of the curricular, and that was sort of a new thing that emerged out of this global leadership program. On the co-curricular side, there were a couple of new things that emerged. 2 study abroad or short-term immersion trips, one to Costa Rica and one to Brazil, and that just actually happened over spring break. Those were led by Erin Asmunsen in the leadership minor, and so those are non-credit bearing, service-based experiences for students who maybe aren't able to or not interested in taking a credit-bearing experience or want a shorter-term immersion experience. And then also there's a leadership certificate that has existed for quite a while here at the university. And again, they started looking at that and thinking, how do we integrate sort of the global context into that existing leadership certificate? So out of that now is just more intentionality around that. So again, we've looked at both the curricular and co-curricular. In terms of the theoretical frameworks or sort of the learning outcomes and development outcomes, there's 4 major areas, again, that we are looking for this sort of umbrella program to help students develop. And that's leadership, global intercultural and international identity, diversity, and civic engagement. Let's see. So now to talk more specifically about the course, this was, I will say, a long process and one that included a lot of people. I served as a subcommittee chair of this course, and there were a number of things. We had people from Learning Abroad, people from CFANS. I'm technically from CLA, but serve campus-wide. People from MK, the Multicultural Center for Academic Excellence, all working to try and figure out what this would look like, how it would be developed. At the same time, we also had a committee that was working on theoretical and pedagogical frameworks to help us understand, again, this larger context of what are the learning outcomes and the objectives. And we had an evaluation subcommittee working on developing evaluation tools. So there were a lot of people involved in this. I think what emerged are some key pieces to the way that we developed this May session course. So first of all, student demographics. One thing that we know is that students of color and international students do not study abroad at the same rates as majority white students. And so one of the things that we were looking at are what are the barriers to doing that? And a lot of times it has to do, well, for international students, it has to do with they're already studying abroad. I mean, this is their experience. And so it can be really challenging to think about, I'm going to go to another country and study. So could we offer a parallel immersion experience with the existing communities that we have that are very diverse for those students. With students of color, a lot of times, again, talking with folks from MK, barriers include financial limitations, family responsibilities, and other things that just make it really challenging to think about taking that time away and studying abroad. So 2 of our target demographics were thinking about international students and students of color. To incentivize that, we were able to secure some funding for scholarships. Again, this is a 3-credit course that happens over May session, so it's 3 weeks. And students basically pay normal tuition as they would for any other course. Plus there's an additional course fee of $144. So it is already, I think, a very affordable alternative to learning abroad. But in addition to that, we secured money from the Office of Equity and Diversity and the Office of Student Affairs to provide $500 scholarships. Again, priority given to students of color and international students to participate in this. So again, it was a very affordable alternative option. Another student demographic that we sort of didn't think about as intentionally, but just recently I met with a student, are student parents. We just met with a student who is a mother of 4, and she came to meet with us and said, there's no way I can study abroad, and this is exactly the kind of opportunity that I want to have, but I can't actually go abroad. I need to be here with my family. And that's another great example of reaching a community of students who might otherwise not be able to go and have sort of what we would consider an immersion experience. The other key component, and again, when we were thinking about the development of this course, we were thinking this really is designed to be an experiential, immersive, to parallel a study abroad. And one of the things that I think is so important with study abroad is that residential component. You're sort of in the community, you go to a country, you live there, and it's not just about taking classes, it's sort of experiencing the entire community and the neighborhood in different contexts. And so, again, knowing that it might be challenging for students to do the full 3 weeks of a residential component, we condensed it down to a weekend, and they actually stayed in Middlebrook Hall. And that was designed for a couple of reasons. One is it gave them sort of an entire weekend to experience the neighborhood at different points of the day, because the neighborhood changes, but also to sort of see the different aspects of the neighborhood. So going out to the restaurants, or maybe seeing what happens in the morning. And then the other piece was, we know that when students study abroad, there's a community that exists and develops within that group, and that can be really powerful, especially when we were talking about themes of leadership, intercultural understanding, community building, and social justice. So having all the students actually together in the same place for a weekend where we could both lay some of the foundational frameworks for understanding leadership and social justice, but also so they could build a community, because they were going to be doing 3 weeks of really intensive learning and work together. The other components, peer mentors. We had 2 peer mentors who one was a graduate student and one was an undergraduate student. And these were both people who had had quite a bit of extensive work in the neighborhood, so we're very familiar with a lot of the context, and could both serve as sort of a liaison between Mary, the instructor, and the community and the students, but also they could model some of the questions that they were having with community organizations. They could talk about their own experiences. Again, this is a very small neighborhood, but there's a lot of complex things happening, and so just to sort of untangle that, they really served as a great resource for those students. And finally, community engagement. So, I guess I should back up and say the reason that we chose Cedar Riverside was a couple of things. One is, I think we have a lot of social capital in this neighborhood, not only through our office, the Community Service Learning Center, but obviously Mary with her work with Chance. There were a lot of existing relationships, and that is so foundational to having a really experiential immersion course, is that you need to know kind of the environment that you're walking into, and you need to know that you have people in the community that are really interested in serving in that co-educator role. And so we already had a familiarity with this neighborhood. The close proximity, of course, is really attractive. And also, we know that students, if you say, raise your hand if you've heard the expression crack stacks, ghetto in the sky, if you're afraid to cross Cedar Avenue, most students will raise their hand and say, I've heard bad things about this neighborhood. So we know that students already have an understanding of this neighborhood, whether or not it's accurate. So there's a real opportunity to dive in and sort of unpack some of those assumptions and stereotypes in a really productive way. And so just knowing that students are here, and so then also the other cool thing is that when they finish this May session experience, they can continue to stay engaged and connected to this neighborhood. I know a lot of times students say, my study abroad experience was so powerful and amazing, but then I left, and it's really hard to stay connected to the internship that I had in Ecuador or the community that I was connected to in South Africa. And this actually allows students to continue those relationships beyond the 3-week course, which I think is a really powerful component. Let's see. And I think the other reason that we chose Cedar Riverside is that it's a very unique neighborhood, and I think at that point I'll actually turn it over to Mary because it is a very unique neighborhood in many ways. So the opportunity, again, for learning and thinking about these ideas of civic engagement, social justice, leadership were just ripe.
Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the course structure. And as Katie mentioned, the idea really was to parallel an immersion experience of study abroad and also to understand leadership in that place-based context. So the course structure is really a combination of analysis of personal leadership, activities designed to help students understand how values, perceptions, and identity influence how you observe and interpret different cultural contexts, and also to understand the ways in which different cultural norms and values can change the way leadership skills and initiatives are utilized to create change. So to achieve those objectives, we focused on the unique features of the neighborhood. So we started with an immersion the first weekend in which students lived in Middlebrook Hall, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Week 1, we focused on immigration or new immigrants, and what Cedar Riverside has always been home to new immigrants, beginning in the mid-1800s. I think it was 1886, Dania Hall, which is a building that now has burned down, but that was put up in 1886, and it was a gathering place for new German and Scandinavian immigrants at that time. Many folks have referred to this neighborhood sort of as the Ellis Island of the Twin Cities. So learning about that rich history, and then also fast forwarding to today, where we have a significant East African population, and in 2009, African Development Center bought the Maradella Sur building, which is right over here on the corner of Riverside and 20th. So we spent the week learning about all of these things. The second week, we really focused on the arts. Many people don't realize that within a few blocks here, there are more live music venues than almost anywhere in the upper Midwest. So we learned about music as well as visited theaters. And then the third week, we spent learning about the counterculture presence in the neighborhood and community organizing. And there's a couple of great examples. Some of you, if you go outside and look out the window this way, maybe you've seen, and we even have a resident who lives in the Cedar Riverside Plaza, the tall multicolored buildings over here that were a vision of the famous architect Ralph Rapson's. When that plaza was originally erected, the neighborhood really fought it, and there were supposed to be 7 more of those plazas in this area. So we talk about that history. We talk about the history of the co-ops in the neighborhood. We had one of the oldest food co-ops in the nation. There still are co-ops that exist here. We visit with our Community Development Corporation and talk about the housing cooperatives in the neighborhood. I'm going to specifically give you some ideas of the visits we went on, walking you through the agenda. So that immersion weekend, really the goal was to introduce students to the neighborhood. So we met with neighborhood residents. We actually had breakfast at the Hard Times and talked with neighborhood residents about some of that history. We met with business owners. We had dinner at the Red Sea and talked with Rassam Solomon. He is the owner of the Red Sea and also the chair of our neighborhood safety committee. He serves on the Business Association and the West Bank Community Coalition, which is our city-recognized neighborhood participation organization. Then we attended a theater performance, and at the same time, that first weekend, the students all took a leadership inventory. So we were all throughout these visits and so forth, we were coming back and the students were writing reflections and we were thinking about our own leadership and, you know, at the same time that we were talking about the leadership of community leaders and organizations in the neighborhood. The week, that first week when we focused on new immigrants, we went and visited with, we went to Dar al-Kuba Mosque, which some of you might know is the old Bedlam Theater. Now it's on the corner on 4th and 6th back by the Cedar Riverside Light Rail Station. And it was, I think students really enjoyed just touring the mosque and learning a little bit more about Islam, but also we met with the director of the Somali Justice and Advocacy Center, and he explained some of the current issues in the neighborhood or current issues that our neighborhood residents are addressing. We met with each week we tried to organize these visits so that we were learning about history, we were meeting with social service organizations, we were meeting with faith-based organizations, other community organizations and businesses. So that week we also had a conversation circle with folks at the Somali American Education Program, and these were students learning English as a second language. And our students, in addition to these visits and then coming back and reflecting on it, they also were volunteering their time. So when we visited the Somali American Education Program, they volunteered and worked one-on-one with adult learners there. The week that the second week, when we focused on the arts, we met with theater folks, came in, gave a broad overview of the arts in Cedar Riverside. We also had an opportunity to meet with the author of a book called West Bank Boogie, to learn about some of the famous musicians that got their start here on the West Bank, and we actually went into some of those music venues. And then we visited with the Business Association and talked with them about how they're trying to brand this neighborhood as an arts district. We also were able to spend some time with youth that second week and to look at public art. And then the last week, again, we looked at co-ops, talked about co-ops, we talked about the parks and the plaza in terms of community organizing, and then tried to bring it all together. What was really useful was a couple of things. This book was suggested by the group, the Global Leadership Program group, and I found it's called Student Leadership Challenge by Kouzes and Posner, and it was really helpful to ground the course in this leadership theory. As part of this, there's a student learning profile that you do online, and so we did that. And also the first week of the course, the students took the IDI. Some of you may be familiar with that, the Intercultural Development Inventory. But both of these things, this goes back to what Katie was saying about this course being an endeavor of a number of different groups on campus. I don't think I could have done an effective job of just facilitating this inventory and talking to students about it. It would have been okay. But what was really great was, for instance, for the IDI, Barbara Kapler from International Student Services came in, facilitated that, and then the students in follow-up were able to spend an hour with ISS staff really talking about and getting feedback around that inventory. And I think that made all the difference in the world because, and we'll talk more about evaluation at the end, but when it came time, at the end of the course, when students said, wow, I've really learned a lot about myself in terms of cross-cultural communication, I think it was a result of that effort. So I think that's it about the course structure. We're going to flip the next slide. Yep. So course evaluation. So this chart here, which you can also see, we're also doing a poster session out in the hall, so you can take a closer look and learn more about this. But this is the top areas of learning from the Ireland May session, the South Africa May session, and the Cedar Riverside May session. And the main outcome was that the top areas of learning were somewhat similar for all three of them. And so we thought that, we felt that the evaluation really pointed to the fact that students who have a cross-cultural learning experience domestically, that we are achieving these similar learning outcomes. Also, I think, is it another slide?
Yeah.
Evaluation. So these were some of the things that students said were top learning outcomes. The first two, local neighborhood cultures and identities and respect and appreciation for community knowledge, I kind of felt like if I didn't get that across, I really screwed up. And leadership concepts and application, that was the intention. And so, again, I felt like that one was, but as we move on down, the awareness of cultural sensitivity, global influences in local communities, cultural norm influence on leadership and interculture, those were the ones that there was some question about. And they're much harder to achieve, I think. But the result was the students reported that this course really helped them do that. And I have the evaluation right here, and I'm just going to share a couple of things from it. Participant responses indicated significant overall improvement in understanding core concepts, learning about Cedar Riverside community organizations and their leaders, understanding of personal leadership style, self-awareness, and general leadership concepts were seen as most important. The students highlighted addressing and understanding the roots of stereotypes about the community. And as Katie said, I mean, oftentimes we'll even do just an hour neighborhood tour, and it can change students' perceptions because many students here have heard, negative or have a negative impression of this neighborhood, particularly related to violence and overall safety issues. Number two was understanding of ways to get involved in the community in the future by discussing these opportunities with community members. And I think this also speaks to that there's already an infrastructure, there's already relationships that exist between the university and this neighborhood. And so that really lended itself to students having this experience and being able to continue. Recently, I was over at the Somali American Education Program. I'm over there actually every week. But there was a staff person there that shared with me, oh yeah, your student from last May just came in and painted the classrooms. So these students, not only did they have a good experience, but they plugged in and they continue to develop their own relationships with these organizations and people that they meet. Also, I want to point out that we did this pre-post evaluation, so it allowed students to reflect back on what they felt they came into the experience with, the knowledge they came into it. And what was interesting about that was the realization of how much is left to learn that surfaced in the student comments at the end. And I thought that was a really valuable learning outcome. They also reported more confidence in seeing themselves as interculturally aware. And I think those are the key points. Did I miss anything?
I think that's great.
Okay.
So I want to just share, of course, we don't have any students here to speak to the course, and we forgot to sort of mention what the course in terms of enrollment looked like. We had a very small group. There were only 8 students. 3 were students of color, 1 international student, and the remaining 4 were white students. So in that way, we feel like we did achieve some of our target demographic goals. But of course, the experiences of the students are what have been the most powerful for me in just affirming that the idea of this course was a good thing, and also seeing the evaluations and saying, wow, you don't really have to even leave this neighborhood to have the same sort of learning outcomes as you do when you go to another country. And so that was a really powerful thing. So one of the assignments that we had asked the students to do was to create a personal geography. And this was meant to be done in a creative way, so any way that they wanted to. And so the questions were, how do you present yourself in terms of your multiple identities in this personal geography? What do you want to have represented? What aspects of the neighborhood are referenced in your personal geography, and how did you choose to represent them and why? How did you place your own image or references to your own image in the context of community work? And what message does the finished portrait, in your opinion, have for the viewer? And then what we did is have them write up sort of an analysis, knowing that these students aren't artists. But I wanted to share one, and I guess I will just pass it around because I think it is so powerful. You can put on the glasses if you want, which is the intention of the student's work. But I'd like to just read some of his reflective writing on this piece that he created. And maybe I'll just quickly describe, if it doesn't make it all around. It's a picture of him, a photograph of him in the neighborhood, and then the glasses, which the rest will be explained. So the student writes, I wanted to create a limited perspective, which is accomplished through the borders of a small box with tissue paper on the top to allow for more light onto its contents. The contents are viewed through a child's rose-colored glasses, indicating that my minimalist perspective, which again is the language of the IDI, which is where the student was developmentally placed, IDI as a minimalist. So indicating that my minimalist perspective is still in a phase that is immature and that does not have an effect on my perception. The fact that it is not permanently fixed to the box, the glasses, is intentional because these glasses are not of necessity what I have or will always have use when looking at things. The content of the box include a photo which is wrapped in plastic. The photo is of my son and me in the Cedar Riverside area in front of the Riverside Plaza. This landscape deliberately includes the towers, the Riverside Towers, as they are in many ways symbolic of the neighborhood for many people. The plastic itself is yet another layer intending to be a filter to further separate the viewer from what is being viewed. In this case, it can act as a memory of all that has been experienced in the neighborhood, all that has been heard about the neighborhood from other people, and personal biases. I chose not to write on the picture itself because I did not want to give an impression that these things are themselves a part of the actual essence of the photo. They are exterior to and imposed upon the picture. I wanted to convey that the borders, boundaries, biases, and many other things that we ourselves write on the world around us are not permanently fixed and we often change them throughout our experience. If that would have taken, well, on the photo paper, I would have somehow put pencils in my hand and my son's hand to show that we are the ones who are doing the writing on the world around us, and that what we write is not inherent in the things we write upon. So I just found this to be an extremely powerful reflection. And again, thinking of reflection as a very important tool in this classroom. We did not emphasize a lot of academic reading and writing. Again, it was designed to be immersive and experiential. And so providing creative, reflective ways for students to articulate what it is that they were learning and seeing. And again, thinking of the ways in which this student in particular really took some of the language and the learning from the intercultural development inventory, affirmed for us how important that was, and also just provided, again, a language for what are really complicated concepts around your own identity and how you see other people. And I think he was able to do that in a really succinct and powerful way. So I hope everyone gets a chance to see that piece. So just to sort of wrap up, and then we have some time for questions, is so last May was the first time that we offered this course. There were 8 students. We are offering it again this year and hope to have at least 10 students. We were certainly challenged with a number of reasons, I think, in terms of marketing. But after this year, our idea is to do it every other year for a couple of reasons. One is Mary's capacity and also the neighborhood's capacity. It just gets to be really intensive when it's every single year and you're sort of tapping the same people every single year to serve as co-educators and to come in and talk with the students. So that's our plan. But we have some challenges associated with that. One of the biggest things, and just a personal reflection for me, is that because this course was founded by GPSA and OED, it did not have an academic home. And that made a huge difference in the ability, well, one, we spent a lot of time trying to find an academic home, which was really challenging. Ultimately, what we ended up doing was putting it in the course designator ID, Interdepartmental Studies, which is a course designator that's housed out of my office. And a lot of the off-campus domestic programs like National Student Exchange and HECUA are also ID courses. But again, we're not in an academic house like Global Studies or American Studies, so recruiting for the students has been challenging. Also, of course, the sustainability of having it not housed in an academic home, I think, is going to be problematic in the future. And also, when there's so many people involved, there's sort of a limited lack of ownership. So who actually owns this course? Everyone really loves this course, but my time is basically volunteer to do all the administrative work for this. So again, thinking about how do we sort of sustain and support that, I think is going to be a future challenge, no matter how great we think the course is. And we think it is a really amazing course, and the evaluations and the experience of the student affirm that decision. So that is basically where we're at right now. And I will just say, if you are on the Twin Cities campus, we are still trying to get students involved and registered for this course. So if you would like more information or know a student in particular who might be interested, I would highly encourage you to talk with them about this opportunity. So,
And there's flyers out at the poster session.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Great.
Questions?
Yeah, I was asked to repeat the question for the purposes of the audio. So you just asked in terms of the capacity, if we were to switch to a different neighborhood, say South Minneapolis, could we offer it more frequently? It's definitely something we've talked about. One of the sort of natural places in my mind, and I think some other people's minds, is also to offer something similar to this in North Minneapolis, in large part because of our Urban Research and Outreach Center and the capacity that's been developed there with a number of different offices at the university. Again, the challenge with that is ownership and staff capacity to actually develop and implement the course. And so while we had a lot of people working on this, they were all volunteer committee members. It's not inherently designed in any one person's job. So the amount of effort and time it took to develop this course would probably be equal in any other neighborhood. Again, building those relationships, setting up the syllabus, setting up the experiences. So again, we got a lot of great initial support, and it's just, can we sustain that support from GPSA and OED to continue to offer? Because I mean, you're right. The Twin Cities is absolutely rich with communities that are, one, we have relationships with and have a really important story to tell and share with students, and then, thinking about the students really getting a lot of benefit out of that. So I think it's something we've talked about, but we haven't had the administrative capacity to do that, yeah.
Okay, well, we're out of time. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks, Katie and Mary. And the next